From Recovery to Restoration, Christopher Córdova. Note to the reader. This brief book is a deep personal reflection on some of the greatest challenges of our time, how they connect, and how we can take advantage to bounce back more resilient, fair, and prosperous than ever. The text makes a reflection call and an action call. The reflection call develops around some questions that we should ask ourselves. What can we learn from the COVID-19 crisis? How can we foster resilience? What are the dimensions and key ideas that we should take into account in the economic recovery strategies to come? What role should we give to previous international agreements, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, in those economic recovery strategies? What role should we give, in particular, to the environmental agenda in those recovery strategies? There are many links between the public health and the environmental agenda. And this is a golden opportunity to advance both in an integral and visionary way. Also, it is time to put ecosystems and natural reserves at the center of our economic plans. The action call in part 2 proposes 4 practical steps you can take to contribute today to a meaningful transformation for the international agenda. Christopher Córdova, Dubai and Mexico City, March 2020. Part 1. Lessons learned. As of the day these lines are being written, the coronavirus outbreak is not over. It is in fact still far from being over. And even when it has not come to an end, there are already lessons we can profit from or waste. It is up to us. 1. Cooperation, not competition, is the key to survival. The great poet from Nicaragua, Ernesto Cardenal, who died less than a month ago, insisted on this every time he had the chance. He said that cooperation exists at every biological level, and that it is in our genes. Our culture of praising the winner, the conqueror, the egocentric must end. We should also praise the humble, the one that facilitates cooperation, the enabler, the connector, the peacemaker, and the one that cares for others and selves. In all global challenges, the solution is on the hands of the many, not the few, and never on one single set of hands. If our governments act swiftly to protect us, then society must support them and take safety measures seriously. And if they don't act swiftly, then society must lead in an organized and responsible manner. It is not a time for conflict, but cooperation. Let's leave politics for later. As the COVID-19 outbreak develops, the international agenda will turn towards economic recovery. Many voices are already advocating for finding a deeper meaning in this particular global health and economic crisis. They are already shaping public opinion on how economic recovery should look like. We can divide their messages in several dimensions. The social dimension. We have to dig deeper. Recent crises have showcased a very real social discontent and a reiterated call for more equality. The financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 gave birth to the now extended concept of the division of the world's population in the 99% and the 1%, which is only a reincarnation of a myriad of movements across history advocating for a fairer distribution of wealth. Social discontent has and will keep creating social unrest, turmoil, and violence. We all know this. We cannot keep ignoring this. We must create opportunities for all, starting by the very basic: food, water, shelter, physical safety, and healthcare. The behavioral dimension: awareness, preparedness, coordination, swiftness, and discipline. These concepts are vital to tackle any future global public health risk. Communities should be more aware. Never in history was there nearly as much information about pandemics than in 2020. And of course, everyone soon was drowning on information, which is not exactly, but actually near to having no access to information. Part of the awareness must come in the form of developing criteria to select the information and to be more responsible when it comes to sharing it. Fake news, inaccurate data, conflicting reports, panic-triggering social media content, and misleading second-hand analysis from biased sources are a nightmare and do real harm. Anxiety and restlessness kill awareness easily and lead to being ill-prepared. Preparedness should come from having adequate information from quality sources. What will be a quality source for future challenges is something the world experts will need to work on intensely, because any institution can be either biased or be exposed to inexact or outdated information. Even if all the parties act in good faith, there can be confusion and distortion along the way. First, a medical doctor in a rural community communicates the situation of a remote area to the best of his knowledge. Then, the local hospital's leadership communicates the situation to the best of its knowledge. Then, the local government communicates the situation to the best of its knowledge. Then, the national government reviews the situation and probably communicates to the best of its knowledge. And yet, it all could have changed by the moment it reached the top of the decision-making ladder. Multiply this by dozens, hundreds, thousands of communities, villages, districts, cities, and then you will have a data reverberation that creates confusion and ill-informed decisions, taken even by the most qualified experts and focused leaders. Effective coordination can only come from prepared institutions and communities. Swiftness in the reaction to events will depend on all of the former links of the chain. And discipline comes as the crown jewel. If all of the above mentioned components have been taken into account, then sticking to the defined protocols and strategies is imperative. A good strategy can go to waste at the slightest display of indiscipline. The community dimension. Many people say that this time economic recovery must also include a greater sense of compassion and fairness. Religious leaders, public opinion leaders, and millions of concerned citizens and directly affected citizens are saying that this time recovery should not be entirely disconnected from efforts to create more resilient communities through the promotion of an enhanced notion of belonging, inclusion, cohesion, and unity. 2. The world system is fragile. We can start thinking about the world system in an even broader sense than the systems theory has done so far. It is not the world economy. It is not the world's financial system. It is not the trade. It is not the international system formed of states and international organizations. It is not the socio-economic system. It is not the natural world. It is not all the infrastructure and means of production combined. It is not the globalized society or a collection of all cultures and beliefs. It is all of the above mentioned and more. And yes, the fly of a butterfly has repercussions far away from its delicate wings. The world system must be taken into account in public policy, legislation, investment policies, and research. A virus can break the economy. A preference for an investment can harm human rights in another country. Drug-related violence can have a powerful cultural impact in areas not directly affected by it. Consequences of any action can travel fast and far. 3. Nature recovers fast if we slow down. This, let's be honest, is the most important of all. Surely, we will not abandon cities nor will stop traveling from one place to the other. But if we do not take drastic action to protect our planet and give ecosystems a real chance to recover, we are doomed. And just to make myself clear, by doomed, I do mean royally screwed. Whenever someone asks me about the likelihoods of a climate change-caused apocalypse or doomsday, I always tell them that the human-crafted environmental collapse will not come in the form of a doomsday where we all die in a moment, but in 60 years of suffering and instability at a scale we still cannot understand. The house is burning, and yes, we are busy now, and should be of course, fighting a pandemic. But forget not, the house is burning. And after the pandemics, we will find ourselves fighting recession and then any other global challenge that arises. And as a teenager that procrastinates on the most important part of the homework, we are leaving the protection of the planet that sustains us at the very end of our to-do list. Human-accelerated climate change is only the most discussed environmental challenge, but our current situation, it's not nearly as simple as that. Pollution and biodiversity loss are themselves challenges of an epic scale. Pollution can sound mild, but what it actually means today is outright poisoning of the water, air, and soil. Every day, people fall ill and die due to pollution. Rest assured that it is more lethal than the cruelest wars humanity has decided to create. It is ubiquitous, and yet we have grown used to it and have accepted to normalize it, as much as we have normalized horrible forms of violence at one moment or the other. Human-caused biodiversity loss is a direct threat to the very backbone of ecosystems. And ecosystems are not just what we can see in documentaries. Ecosystems are what keep us alive. Exciting and full of adventures as movies might have made us see them, environmental apocalyptic scenarios won't be nearly as fun. And something we tend to forget. Environmental collapse would mean that most, if not all of us, will not be the lucky main characters that survive and thrive in danger, but part of the casualties. Just as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's famous Little Prince would say, war is not an adventure, it is a sickness, like typhus. We could today say that environmental destruction is not the prelude of some great survival adventure, but a repulsive sickness that comes from the rotten fruit of pathetic selfishness. So make no mistake, the house is burning. The COVID-19 crisis would have an indelible impact in the years to come. These are the major lessons I can think of right now, in March 2020, and everyone should make a very personal assessment on lessons learned as well. In fact, the pain this crisis is inflicting to families and entire societies reminds me a quote from a movie in the film The Equalizer, where Rory McCall says, "There are two kinds of pain in this world, the pain that hurts and the pain that alters." We will see which kind this will be. Part 2. From recovery to restoration. As the conversation turns towards economic recovery, we must be sure to resume other key efforts where we left them before this period that we could clearly call a pause. For instance, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the most comprehensive and ambitious framework so far to channel concern and action towards the greatest challenges of humanity. So, under no scenario should we try to reinvent fire in a post-COVID-19 world. We must stick to previous agreements and agendas and move forward with greater energy and focus. At the same time, we should insist on the necessity of linking public health and environmental policies. There are dozens of connections between public health and environmental challenges, from the awakening of previously unknown bacteria long frozen in melting ice as a result of climate change, to the increased rates of transmission of tropical diseases through mosquitoes and other insects. Furthermore, the lack of green areas in cities affect the air quality and increases respiratory and cardiorespiratory diseases. Water pollution causes severe and sometimes deadly gastrointestinal diseases. The erosion and pollution of the ground results in lower quality food and hinders the future ability of entire communities to sustain themselves. Climate instability causes famines and will be responsible for hundreds of thousands of climate refugees. Violence due to scarcity and a high degree of vulnerability. Many chronic diseases are a result from the way we eat, and food production at an industrial scale in turn has an environmental footprint which often kicks back our communities in the form of polluted soil, water bodies, and air. We have a cognitive bias that makes it hard, very hard, to understand that our very existence in modern societies has an environmental impact. Our economy's carbon and pollution footprint is yours and mine, and everybody's combined. If you turn on the light in the room, if you have a refrigerator, if you use any motorized vehicle, if you boil water, if you use internet, if you eat something you did not cultivate for yourself using only local resources, then you are impacting the environment. How much of that are you compensating on a daily basis? we are all responsible. The harm is collective, and so the solutions should be. In pure honesty, we have not understood human-accelerated climate change yet. The scale of the damage we have caused to the environment is hard to measure, and, what is more, it is still hard to imagine. Climate instability is paired with the existence of islands of plastic in the world's oceans, with the acidification of the oceans, with the ever-increasing amounts of toxic waste on the land, rivers and lakes, with the extinction of thousands of species every year, with the destruction of forests and jungles, with the pollution of air well beyond any health recommendation, and with the indifference around all these problems. We are late. We need urgent action in many fronts, but one of them, which is usually forgotten, is the conservation of ecosystems in their natural state. It is time to assess and understand the enormous positive impact that natural reserves can have on the environment, health and economic agendas. We must put nature at the core of the economic recovery strategies, and more specifically, the restoration of ecosystems by creating more public and private natural reserves, expanding current public and private reserves, and creating corridors, clusters of natural reserves that receive special attention, particularly in areas where there is migration of species, improving the level of protection of such reserves, creating and integrating value chains that benefit the communities around the natural reserves and bridge the development gap that often separates them from more connected areas. It is imperative to create incentives for the communities to better protect natural reserves near them, and their service should be amply rewarded. There must be investment towards the communities surrounding the natural reserves, not only performing social interventions, but actually facilitating the creation of quality jobs and the establishment of community-backed, profitable, sustainable businesses. What is good for truly sustainable businesses is good for the planet and for all of us. Promoting innovation and the inclusion of new technologies in the protection of natural reserves. Now, what can any citizen do? Well, there are 4 things that you can do. 1. If you are lucky enough to own some land or lead a company or institution that owns some land, you can promote the declaration of a portion of it as a natural reserve. This applies to farms, ranches, or any large landlots owned by individuals, companies, or institutions. For example, university campuses, sport clubs, company headquarters, and industrial areas. If this is the case, there is plenty of information online, and you just have to research a bit. 2. If that is not the case, you can lobby your company, your university, or any big institution you have access to, so they can start considering protecting even a small area, maybe in or around your city. You can lobby your local government to increase the amount of land protected as natural reserves. You can do this with your national government as well. The important thing is, do not be afraid of writing a letter to your authorities and telling them how important it is to include in the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategies A. The escalation of the amount of land and water bodies protected, and B. The integration of communities near the natural reserves in new value chains so they can have more economic incentives to protect those reserves. 3. If you think you are too young for number 2, do not worry. You are not. The voice of the children is very powerful. So ask an adult to help you with number 2. If you are an adult and have children, then write your own letters to the authorities and then help your children write their letters too. Show them that their voice counts. 4. Repeat. We need to spam the leaders and the authorities until it is quite clear that the restoration of nature, that bringing ecosystems back to health, and bringing remote communities surrounding the natural reserves into economic prosperity must be part of the economic recovery efforts. Part 3. Can you hear the voice of the jungle? In fact, you can. You can hear the voice of the jungle and use thousands of hours of sound recordings to identify threats to the jungle, from illegal hunting and logging, and from fires to unauthorized building. Those sounds can also help you identify patterns and discover the rhythm of the jungle for a deeper understanding of how the animal and plant species live and interact. As an example, in Costa Rica, the telecom giant Huawei and the NGO Rainforest Connection are using all mobile phones to collect environmental sounds that are then uploaded to the cloud so the data can be analyzed with the help of artificial intelligence. This supports conservation efforts since it provides valuable information that can translate into better, targeted, more cost-effective interventions. Just as an example, this can be used to protect an endangered species. For example, the spider monkey, as illegal logging is a leading cause of habitat loss. This is used to improve the detection of chainsaws active in the rainforest. There are other fascinating ecosystem monitoring technologies. One of my favorites is Saildrone, which collects incredibly precious data from the world's oceans. Saildrone has a great potential, and the data it is collecting right now can help us model weather scenarios and could eventually help us guide policy and investment strategies for the coastal and ocean areas. Here a note. According to Constanza Gomez-Mont, AI could be described as informatic systems that can interact with the world, as in voice or image recognition, and smart behaviors that we believe to be essentially human, as analyzing, choosing, or deciding. And there are as well other Internet of Things and AI-related monitoring and data analysis efforts, from analyzing microorganisms and their DNA to analyzing images captured by satellites. Most of these initiatives are in their early stages and require funding, networking, and exposure to fully develop into game changers. The modification of the coasts, the salinization of freshwater bodies, the decline in the productivity of soils, and the increase in the intensity of storms and hurricanes are just some of the problems derived from a greater human-accelerated climate instability. These are problems that take lives, cost money, and are also having a political cost for governments around the world. The climate vulnerability of the cities and industries is going to grow, and we have already passed the point of no return to lower the carbon emissions. We are at the doorstep of a large-scale environmental crisis. Humankind has already survived an ice age and very warm, dry seasons, but we often forget that this time we have poisoned the water that will flood us, the soil that feeds us, and the air that we have acidified the oceans and reduced the fish populations to a dangerous level, and that we have eradicated the ecosystems that, in the face of a social crisis due to poor harvests, would have been our source of food. In the environmental crisis to come, there will be many simultaneous variables that will render it far more complex to solve. More productivity, more efficient processes, and a faster world, in many ways, will be the result of AI. It will also add up to the wealth of the world, since around 14% of its GDP in 2030 will be brought by AI. AI's future role in the economy is becoming a bit more clear every year, with every new appliance and an increased computing power to play with. But we have not defined yet how we will use AI to improve the state of the world, and particularly how we will use it to restore the ecosystems. Those ecosystems on which our life depends. On the other hand, the carbon footprint of AI is growing, since the infrastructure that makes possible that massive computing power requires energy, metals that are mined, the manufacture of its components, and transportation. The possibilities make me think that we might be in front of a real chance to fast forward the sustainability and future we deserve. We need ambitious strategies and radical actions, and we must, of course, start by asking the right questions so we can spend brain power, time, and financial resources exploring their answers. So, in a post-COVID-19 world, we must develop an integral approach towards recovery, and not a compartmentalized one. Instead of focusing on economic recovery and public health preparedness to epidemics as separated things, we should keep both in sight simultaneously. Furthermore, we have to bring in to the equation the social, ethical, and community dimensions previously mentioned, and include the environmental protection with a clear emphasis on the opportunities that new technologies allow us to imagine. Some questions worth asking to start exploring such opportunities are: how can AI be used to improve our preparedness for the public health challenges of the coming decades and create more resilient communities and cities? How can AI be used to improve our preparedness to tackle the infectious diseases that are linked to the temperature rise in tropical regions, and therefore directly linked to climate change? How can we collaboratively advance in the knowledge, consensus, and practical application of AI to accelerate solutions in the health and the climate agendas? How to prepare our national information systems to better predict the impacts of temperature changes in different locations? How can we enable mechanisms to share environmental data between interested parties in a trusted way? How can we increase governments and industries' understanding of AI as a tool for more effective green economy policies in responsible, sustainable, and effective ways? How can we create a more competitive AI for climate ecosystems that harnesses new AI-enabled possibilities to amplify results? How can we empower people of all disciplines and cultural backgrounds, including the indigenous peoples, to take part in the design and deployment of machine learning models? How can we use AI to model sea level rise and assess the preparedness of coastal cities and regions for the different scenarios? Regarding agritech, how can AI be used to maintain production efficiency, optimize water and energy use, identify opportunities in crop management to increase the resistance to pests and diseases, and reduce food waste? How can AI help us model scenarios for natural disasters and drastic environmental changes so that authorities can be better prepared to respond and protect the most vulnerable communities? How can AI be used to identify truly sustainable investment opportunities in and around natural reserves? How can we fast forward the funding of visionary projects to better integrate the communities around the natural reserves to the market in fair conditions? How can we create a more competitive AI for climate ecosystem that harnesses new AI-enabled possibilities to amplify results? My agency is currently working with CMinds and several institutional partners to develop a global initiative called AI for Climate, which aims to explore possible answers to these questions while deploying technology, including AI applications, to protect and monitor natural reserves around the world. The rapid growth and increasing dissemination of AI demands us to think and decide how we are going to use its power to help us react to pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. The present AI revolution marks a unique opportunity to develop creative ways to effectively mobilize governments, industries, academia, and organizations towards cooperation. What we urgently need is initiatives that bring as many actors together in a journey of discovery, interest alignment, and practical application of AI for climate resilience, economic recovery, and environmental restoration. In fact, this is how we can go from recovery to restoration. The COVID-19 pandemic's shock waves are hitting all industries, and a smart way to ignite recovery is to look at the challenge of restarting the wheel from the sustainability perspective. Why not starting new value chains that go from the communities surrounding natural reserves to the industries around the cities? Why not integrating monitoring and data analysis systems that help us better understand our ecosystems and therefore develop better policies, legal frameworks, and investment strategies for sustainable territory administration and natural resource management? The economic recovery efforts will not be successful unless we bounce back more sustainability-oriented than ever. And it is about time that we understand that the most important step towards a truly sustainable economy is to restore ecosystems. And that restoration needs to be done by expanding and multiplying natural reserves around the world, improving and modernizing their protection, and creating wealth, value chains, and quality jobs in the communities around the reserves. Final note: we will walk from this crisis together, and when we do, we need to be ready to learn from it. Perhaps the biggest lesson from this crisis is that nature recovers fast if we slow down.